their backs on her. "Stay away from me, Uremma," one of the girls, Ada, said coldly. "I don't want your bad luck to rub off on me." "But Ada, you know I would never hurt anyone. I didn't do anything wrong," Uremma pleaded with tears streaming down her face. "No, you are a witch, and you will bring bad luck to anyone who comes near you," Ada yelled. Once upon a time, in the kingdom of Isiago, there lived a girl named Uremma. She was known far and wide for her stunning beauty. Her skin glowed like the morning sun, and her smile could brighten the gloomiest day. But Uremma's life wasn't always bright and beautiful. When she was just 16 years old, a terrible fire broke out in her house. The fire consumed everything, and it took away the lives of her beloved parents, Mazi Okeke and Nnenna. Uremma was the only child of her parents, and she loved them so much. She couldn't understand how life could be so cruel. The night of the fire, she was inside the house, but somehow she escaped unharmed. The villagers couldn't believe it. They whispered among themselves, looking at her with fear and suspicion. How could she have survived such a terrible fire? They murmured. She must have done something evil. The people of Isiago began to spread rumors. They said she was a witch, and that she used dark powers to kill her parents and save herself. There is no other way she could have survived. One of the villagers, Mami Ijoma, shouted in the village square. She must have cast a spell to escape. Even Uremma's close friends turned their backs on her. "Stay away from me, Uremma," one of the girls, Ada, said coldly. "I don't want your bad luck to rub off on me." "But Ada, you know I would never hurt anyone. I didn't do anything wrong," Uremma pleaded with tears streaming down her face. "No, you are a witch, and you will bring bad luck to anyone who comes near you," Ada yelled before running off, leaving Uremma standing alone. As days turned into weeks, Uremma became isolated. She had no one to talk to, no one to comfort her. She often wandered around the village, staring at the burnt remains of her house. Her parents' voices seemed to echo in her ears, but there was no one there. She was all alone. People would point fingers at her and make cruel remarks. "There goes the witch," they would say. "Don't let her look at you, or you might catch her bad luck." Even when she walked to the village market, no one would sell anything to her. "Go away, Uremma," the market woman would shout. "We don't want your bad luck." Each day was filled with pain and rejection. Uremma would sit by the riverside and cry for hours. She missed her parents so much. The loneliness was too much for her to bear. "Mama, Papa, why did you leave me?" she would sob, staring at the river that flowed quietly, as if sharing her grief. 1 year passed and nothing changed. The villagers still despised her, and she still had no one to talk to. Uremma felt trapped. The sadness in her heart was like a heavy stone that weighed her down. One cold evening, as she lay on the hard floor of the tiny shed she managed to sleep in, she made up her mind. "I can't stay here anymore," she whispered to herself. I will leave Isiago and go somewhere no one knows me. Maybe then I can find peace. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, Uremma packed the little she had into a small cloth bag. She looked around the village one last time. The place that was once her home was now full of bitter memories. With a deep sigh, she turned her back and began her journey. Uremma walked and walked, her bare feet carrying her through thick forest and across narrow streams. She didn't stop, not even when the path was rough or when her feet hurt. Her only thought was to get as far away from Isiago as she could. After many hours of walking, she finally reached the neighboring kingdom called Obodocha. Obodocha was a big kingdom, known for its wealth and power. The roads were wide and paved, and the houses were tall and beautiful. People bustled around, buying and selling, laughing and talking. But Uremma didn't have any money, and she had no one to turn to. She walked around aimlessly until she stumbled upon a small abandoned hut at the edge of the kingdom. The hut looked old and deserted. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and dust covered everything inside. But to Uremma, it felt like a palace. She brushed away the cobwebs and swept the floor with a bundle of dried grass she found outside. This will be my new home, she said to herself softly. That night, Uremma lay on the cold floor of the hut, staring up at the wooden roof. She didn't have a soft bed like she used to, or a warm blanket to cover herself. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a little bit of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I can start a new life here, she whispered as she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. After settling in Obodocha, Uremma knew she needed to find a way to survive. She couldn't keep living in the abandoned hut without doing something to earn money. One early morning, she woke up, determined to look for work. She tied a wrapper around her waist, covered her head with a small scarf and set out. I need to work. I am not afraid of any hard job, she said to herself as she walked down the narrow paths of the village. She approached a group of women who were weeding their farm. Good morning, ma. Good morning, sisters, she greeted politely. They turned to look at her. Good morning, my dear. Who are you? And what do you want? One of the women asked with a curious expression. My name is Uremma, she replied softly. I'm new in this kingdom. Please, I'm looking for any job I can do to earn a little money. The women exchanged glances. Can you work on a farm? The oldest woman asked. Yes, ma. I can do anything. I don't mind if it's a farm work, fetching water or sweeping. I just want to earn some money, Uremma said confidently. Okay, join us then. There is plenty of work to do here, one of the younger women said with a smile. Grateful, Uremma picked up a hoe and began to work alongside them. She put all her strength into the work, her hands moving quickly and skillfully. The women watched in surprise. Despite being so young, Uremma was strong and hardworking. She's a good worker, one of the women whispered to another. We should keep her. By the end of the day, Uremma was covered in sweat, but she had a small bundle of money in her hands. Thank you so much, ma, she said, bowing respectfully. You did well, Uremma. Come back tomorrow if you want to work again, the old woman said, handing her some extra coins. Uremma smiled brightly. I will, ma, thank you. From that day on, Uremma would go out every morning looking for farms to work on. Some days she would weed the crops, other days she would help plant seeds or harvest. No matter how little the pay was, she accepted it gratefully. With the money she earned, she would buy some foodstuffs like yams, vegetables, and palm oil. She then took these items to the market to sell. Yam for sale, fresh vegetables for sale, Uremma would call out, standing at the corner of the busy market. Slowly, people began to notice her. "Who is that girl?" a market woman asked one day. "Oh, that's Uremma. She's a new girl in our kingdom, very hardworking and polite," another replied. The people of Obodocha started to take a liking to her. Unlike in Isiago, where she was rejected, the villagers here welcomed her with open arms. They loved how respectful and kind she was. Uremma always greeted everyone she met on her way and helped people whenever she could. "Good morning, Mama Nkechi," Uremma would greet an old woman she passed every day. "Good morning, my daughter. May you have a blessed day," Mama Nkechi would reply, smiling at the young girl. Even though Uremma made friends, she kept her distance. She didn't want to get too close to anyone or attend social gatherings. Anytime there was a festival or the young maidens gathered to dance, Uremma stayed away. "I don't need to go that far. I'm happy just the way I am," she would say to herself whenever someone invited her to join. Years passed, and Uremma's hard work paid off. She had been living in Obodocha for 2 years now, and she was doing well. She was now 20 years old, and she had managed to rent a small piece of land where she grew her own crops. Every planting season, she would spend long hours under the hot sun planting maize, cassava, and vegetables. When the crops were ready, she harvested them herself and took them to the market. "Come and buy fresh maize, fresh vegetables, fresh cassava," she would shout at her store. People flocked to her store because they knew her produce was always fresh and affordable. As time went on, Uremma saved a lot of money from her farm and market sales. One day, as she sat in her hut counting her earnings, she thought to herself, "Everyone in this village has a nice house except me. I think it's time I upgrade my life." Uremma began to search for a small house to buy. It didn't have to be big or fancy, but something more comfortable than the old hut she was living in. After weeks of searching, she finally found a simple one-bedroom house. It was built with bricks, had a thatched roof, and small windows that let in just enough sunlight. "This is perfect," Uremma said to the seller. "I will buy it." With her hard-earned money, she paid for the house and moved in. The villagers were amazed at how far she had come. She's just a young girl, but look at how she has transformed her life, they said. Now living in her own small house, Uremma felt a sense of pride. She had worked so hard, and finally, she could rest in a place she could truly call her own. Though she still didn't go to social gatherings, she knew she was happy and content. Obodocha had given her a new chance at life, and she embraced it with all her heart. After moving into the small house she had worked so hard to buy, Uremma finally felt a sense of belonging and comfort. She loved the simplicity of her new home. It wasn't big, but it was hers. The small garden in front was perfect for planting flowers, and the cozy room inside gave her a warm place to rest after a long day's work. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter in her life. One sunny afternoon, As Uremma was arranging the flowers she had planted outside, she noticed a young girl about her age watching her from a distance. The girl had a bright smile and curious eyes. After a few moments, she walked up to Uremma and greeted her. "Good afternoon, I'm Mmesoma," she said cheerfully. "Good afternoon," Uremma replied, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "I'm Uremma. Nice to meet you. I have seen you around the village market, but we have never really talked. I heard you are the new owner of this house," Mmesoma said, looking around. "Yes, I bought it recently," Uremma replied with a small smile. She wasn't used to people talking to her like this, but Mmesoma seemed so nice. "That's great," Mmesoma said excitedly. "I live just a few houses down. Maybe I can come over sometimes and we can talk." Uremma hesitated at first. She hadn't let anyone get too close to her since she left Isiago. But something about Mmesoma's friendly nature made her feel comfortable. "Sure, that would be nice," she agreed softly. From that day on, Mmesoma and Uremma started spending more time together. Mmesoma would visit often, bringing along freshly cooked food or helping Uremma with her garden. They would sit outside and talk for hours. Mmesoma was always full of questions. "Uremma, where did you come from?" she asked one day while they were planting new flowers. Uremma stiffened. I I don't want to talk about it," she murmured, her gaze dropping to the ground. Mmesoma nodded, sensing Uremma's discomfort. "It's okay. You don't have to tell me if you are not ready," she said gently. "I will wait until you feel like talking." This was one of the reasons Uremma felt she could trust Mmesoma. She respected her boundaries and didn't push her to share more than she was willing to. As time passed, their friendship grew stronger. Mmesoma would often tell Uremma stories about the people in Obodocha, the festivals, and the fun things they could do together. "You shouldn't be working so hard all the time, Uremma. Come with me to the maidens' dance," Mmesoma would suggest almost every week. "You will get to meet more people and make more friends. It would be fun." But Uremma always shook her head. "No, Meso, I don't think I'm ready for that. I'm fine just working and staying at home." "Don't be like that," Mmesoma would insist, pouting playfully. "You need to enjoy yourself sometimes. Life is more than just working and staying indoors." Uremma would laugh at her friend's playful expressions, but would still refuse to go out. However, Mmesoma didn't give up. Every chance she got, she would try to convince Uremma to come out and socialize more. One evening, after many months of Mmesoma's gentle persuasion, Uremma finally agreed. "Okay, Mmesoma, I will go with you to the maidens' dance," she said with a sigh, smiling at her friend's delighted expression. "Really? You are not joking, are you?" Mmesoma's eyes widened with excitement. "Yes, I will go." Uremma nodded, her smile growing wider. "Oh, you will love it, I promise," Mmesoma said, jumping up and down. "We'll have so much fun." That evening, Mmesoma helped Uremma pick out a beautiful dress and tied her hair neatly. As they walked to the dance, Uremma felt a little nervous, but Mmesoma stayed close, holding her hand and chatting to keep her calm. When they arrived, Uremma was surprised to see so many smiling faces and hear laughter everywhere. The maidens were dressed in colorful outfits, and the music filled the air with a joyful rhythm. "See? Isn't this nice?" Mmesoma whispered. "Yes, it is," Uremma admitted, feeling a sense of warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. From then on, Uremma began to step out more often. She would join Mmesoma in social gatherings and even started to talk to a few other maidens in the kingdom. She still kept her past to herself, but she felt a little freer, a little lighter. One evening, as they sat under the shade of a tree after a long day, Mmesoma brought up the topic again. Uremma, we have been friends for a long time now. It's been how many months since we met? 6 months? And I still don't know where you came from or what brought you here. Please, can you tell me? Uremma looked at Mmesoma. There was no judgment in her eyes, only concern and care. Taking a deep breath, Uremma decided it was time to tell her story. I am from Isiago Kingdom. She began slowly. My parents, they died in a fire accident. Mmesoma listened quietly as Uremma shared her heartbreaking story. She spoke about how her house caught fire and how her mother tried to save her father and how she was thrown out of the window just in time. But the villagers didn't believe me. Uremma continued, tears welling up in her eyes. They said I was a witch because I survived when my parents didn't. They called me an outcast and pushed me away. Mmesoma's eyes filled with tears as she listened. Oh, Uremma, I'm so sorry you had to go through all this. That's why I came here. Uremma finished, wiping her tears. I couldn't stay in a place where everyone hated me. Mmesoma reached out and hugged her tightly. You are safe here, Uremma. I'm your friend, and I will always be here for you. From that day on, their bond grew even stronger, and Uremma felt she had found not just a friend, but a sister. The friendship between Uremma and Mmesoma continued to blossom. They spent most of their time together, laughing, talking, and sharing stories. However, there was one topic that Mmesoma never seemed to get tired of talking about: Prince Obiora, the prince of Obodocha Kingdom. Uremma, did I tell you that Prince Obiora is the most handsome man in the whole kingdom? Mmesoma said one afternoon as they sat outside Uremma's house weaving baskets. Yes, you did, several times. Uremma replied, smiling softly. She had grown used to Mmesoma's constant chatter about the prince. But truth be told, she didn't care much. Uremma had never seen the prince before and didn't even know what he looked like. But you don't understand, Uremma. His eyes, oh, they are as bright as the morning sun, and his smile, it can melt even the hardest heart. Mmesoma continued. Uremma chuckled. Mmeso, you are always talking about Prince Obiora. Why don't you let him notice you instead of dreaming about him all the time? Mmesoma shrugged, looking serious for a moment. I know, but I just like him so much. I'm certain I'm going to win his heart someday. Uremma looked at her friend, who seemed lost in thoughts of the prince. Well, good luck then. I hope you become the future queen of Obodocha, she teased. Mmesoma laughed and playfully nudged Uremma. Don't worry, when I become the queen, I will make sure you are by my side. Uremma smiled and nodded. I will be cheering for you from the sidelines, I promise. One day, Uremma woke up early as usual and went to her farm to tend to her crops. The sun was high in the sky and the breeze was gentle. She had been walking for a few hours when she suddenly heard a loud scream coming from the forest nearby. What was that? She murmured, stopping to listen carefully. At first, Uremma thought it was her imagination, but then she heard the scream again. It sounded like someone was in trouble. Although she was scared, her kind heart wouldn't let her ignore it. She dropped her hoe and ran to the direction of the scream. When she arrived at the scene, she saw a young man lying on the ground, clutching his leg. His face was twisted in pain and he looked desperate. What happened? Uremma asked, rushing to his side. A snake. It bit me. The young man gasped, his voice strained. Without wasting any time, Uremma tore a piece of cloth from her dress and tied it tightly above the bite to slow down the spread of the venom. Stay calm, I'll be right back, she said, her voice soothing but firm. She quickly ran into the nearby bushes, searching for the herbs her parents had taught her about when she was younger. She found the right leaves, crushed them with her hands, and hurried back to the young man. Here, let me place this on your leg, she said gently, applying the crushed leaves onto the snake bite. It would help draw out the poison. The young man winced but stayed still as Uremma walked. After a few minutes, the pain seemed to lessen, and he looked at her with gratitude. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come, he whispered. It's okay, Uremma replied, her hands still carefully tending to the wound. You should be fine now. Just make sure you rest and don't move your leg too much. The young man nodded, breathing heavily. Who are you? He asked, his voice filled with curiosity. My name is Uremma, she answered simply. And you? I am Obiora, he said, glancing at her as she tied the last piece of cloth around his leg. But what are you doing out here alone in the field? I was working on my farm, Uremma explained. I have been living in this kingdom for 3 years now. Obiora looked surprised. You are not from Obodocha? No, I'm not, Uremma said softly. She hesitated for a moment, then added, I came here after my parents died. Obiora's expression softened. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you, Uremma murmured, not wanting to dwell on the sad memories. Anyway, what are you doing out here all by yourself? Shouldn't you be at home resting? Obiora chuckled lightly, though it was clear he was still in pain. I'm a man. I come out here to set traps, hunt for animals, and sometimes collect fruit. Uremma nodded, still unaware that she was talking to the prince of the kingdom. Well, just be careful. It's dangerous out here, especially if you are alone. Obiora smiled at her concern. I will. Thank you for helping me, Uremma. I don't know how I can ever repay you. You don't have to repay me, Uremma said, standing up and brushing off her dress. I'm just glad you are okay. She didn't ask him any more questions or pry into his personal life. To her, he was just another young man from the village who needed help. She turned to leave, while Obiora called out to her, Wait, will I see you again? Uremma paused, looking over her shoulder. Maybe. I'm usually around here working on my farm. Obiora nodded slowly. I will find you then. I want to know more about you. Uremma gave him a small smile and a nod before turning back to her farm. She didn't think much of their conversation. After all, she didn't know who he really was. She went back to her work, leaving Obiora sitting there, wondering how such a simple girl could be so brave and selfless. As the sun began to set, Uremma packed up her tools and made her way back home from the farm. She was still thinking about the young man she had helped earlier. He seemed kind, and she hoped he would recover quickly, but she brushed the thoughts aside as she approached her house and noticed someone sitting on the small wooden stool outside her door. Mmesoma, Uremma called out, surprised to see her friend there. What are you doing here all alone? Mmesoma jumped up excitedly. Finally! You kept me waiting, Uremma. Where have you been? Workaholic, she asked, putting her hands on her hips in a mock scolding manner. I'm sorry, my friend. I had to stay a bit longer on the farm, Uremma explained, smiling at her friend's playful expression. But I'm here now. What's the matter? You look like you have something to say. Oh, of course, I do. Mmesoma's eyes sparkled with excitement as she grabbed Uremma's hand and led her inside the house. Sit down, sit down. I have a big gist for you today. All right. Uremma laughed, settling down on the mat on the floor. I'm listening. What's the gist? Mmesoma's face lit up as she leaned closer, lowering her voice as if she was about to share a huge secret. Guess where I went today? Where? Uremma asked. I went to see Prince Obiora, Mmesoma declared proudly, her eyes shining with delight. Uremma's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The prince? You went to see him? Yes, I did, and guess what? I think he's starting to notice me. Mmesoma gushed, leaning back with a satisfied smile. Uremma blinked, trying to process what her friend was saying. You are sure? How do you know? Because I was there, Mmesoma said, waving her hands excitedly. I saw him with my own eyes, Uremma. He looked at me and smiled, and when I greeted him, he even nodded in return. Can you believe it? Uremma tilted her head slightly, remembering the young man she had met earlier at her farm. He had mentioned his name was Obiora, but he didn't look like a prince. He was dressed in plain clothes, and he didn't have any guards with him. Could it be that he was the same person? Trying to push the thought away, Uremma looked at Mmesoma and asked, Are you sure he knows who you are, Mmesoma? Of course he does, Mmesoma replied confidently. Why else would he smile at me like that? And he kept looking at me while I was talking to the other maidens. Uremma nodded slowly, not wanting to burst her friend's bubble. Well, I'm happy for you. If the prince is starting to notice you, that's a good thing. Yes, isn't it? Mmesoma giggled, clapping her hands together. Can you imagine? Me, Mmesoma, the future queen of Obodocha. I will have so many beautiful clothes. And you, Uremma, you will have to visit me at the palace every time. Uremma laughed. If you become the queen, I will definitely come and visit you. I will bring you fresh vegetables from my farm. Mmesoma nodded eagerly. Yes, you must. And I will make sure you get a special place to stay whenever you visit. Uremma smiled at her friend's excitement, but she couldn't help feeling a little worried. Mmesoma, I hope you are not getting your hopes up too high. Just take things slowly and let the prince come to you. Don't push too hard, okay? I know, Mmesoma said with a dismissive wave. But I just have this feeling, Uremma. I'm sure that one day, the prince will look at me and see more than just a village girl. He will see the woman he wants to be with forever. Uremma nodded thoughtfully, choosing her words carefully. I understand, but just be careful, okay? You know how people can be. Don't let anyone make fun of you or hurt your feelings because of this. Mmesoma's smile softened, and she reached out to hold Uremma's hand. Don't worry about me, Uremma. I'm stronger than I look, she said gently. Besides, I'm glad you are here to talk to me. I don't think I could have shared all this with anyone else. Uremma squeezed her friend's hand and gave her a warm smile. I'm always here for you, Mmeso, no matter what happens. They continued talking and laughing, with Mmesoma going on and on about the prince and how she was certain she would win his heart. Uremma listened patiently, offering encouraging words and nodding whenever Mmesoma asked for her opinion. But deep down, Uremma still couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that there was something strange about all of this. Uremma, don't you think it's wonderful? Mmesoma asked suddenly, interrupting Uremma's thoughts. What's wonderful? Uremma asked, snapping out of her thoughts. That you will get to know the future queen of Ubudocha before anyone else. Mmesoma said with a cheeky grin. Uremma laughed, shaking her head. Yes, it's wonderful. I just hope that the prince sees what a wonderful person you are, Mmesoma. You deserve to be happy. And I will be, Mmesoma said confidently. Just wait and see. As they continued talking, Uremma couldn't help but smile at her friend's enthusiasm. She hoped Mmesoma's dream would come true, but she also knew how unpredictable life could be. For now, all she could do was support her friend and wish her the best. One bright afternoon, Uremma and Mmesoma were walking back from the market, their baskets filled with vegetables, fruit, and other items they had bought. The market was always busy with people chatting and bargaining, but Uremma and Mmesoma managed to weave through the crowd with ease. As they walked along the village path, Mmesoma suddenly grabbed Uremma's arm and whispered excitedly, Uremma, look! That's Prince Obiora over there. Uremma glanced in the direction Mmesoma was pointing and saw a young man dressed in a stunning royal outfit. His attire was made of rich, colorful fabrics, and he had a golden crown resting lightly on his head. A group of palace guards followed closely behind him. The prince's presence seemed to command respect as people around stopped to bow and greet him. Is that really the prince? Uremma asked, squinting her eyes as if trying to see more clearly. Yes, that's him, Mmesoma said eagerly, her voice almost trembling with excitement. That's Prince Obiora, the same one I have been telling you about. Uremma looked at the prince again and felt a strange sense of familiarity. Could this be the same young man she had helped on the farm? But this man looked so different in his royal attire. Before she could ask any more questions, Prince Obiora began walking in their direction. As he got closer, Uremma's heart began to race. She couldn't understand why. Mmesoma, are you sure there is no one else in this kingdom who looks like the prince? She asked, turning to her friend. There is no one else, Uremma. It's definitely him, Mmesoma whispered back excitedly. Prince Obiora stopped right in front of them, his eyes lighting up as he recognized Uremma. He smiled and said, Uremma, it's good to see you again. Mmesoma's jaw dropped in shock. She stared at the prince, then back at Uremma, unable to believe what she was hearing. He knows your name, she stammered. Yes, Mmesoma. Prince Obina replied with a gentle smile. I know Uremma. She's the one who helped me when I was bitten by a snake on her farm. Uremma's eyes widened as realization dawned on her. So, you are the prince? The young man I helped that day was you? She asked, her voice filled with surprise. Yes, I'm Prince Obiora, he said, nodding, and I'm grateful for what you did for me. You saved my life. Thank you once again. Uremma was still in disbelief. But why were you dressed like that on the farm? You didn't look like a prince at all. Prince Obiora chuckled softly. I wasn't disguising myself, Uremma. It's not possible for me to go to a farm dressed in royal robes and a crown, he explained. I wear simple clothes when I go hunting or set traps. Uremma nodded slowly, still processing everything. Mmesoma, on the other hand, was too stunned to speak. She couldn't believe that Uremma had met the prince before, and even more, that the prince knew her name. Prince Obiora glanced at Mmesoma and then back at Uremma. I have to go now, but it was nice meeting you again, Uremma. I hope we can talk some more another time. Of course, Your Highness, Uremma said, giving him a small bow out of respect. Goodbye, Prince Obiora said, giving her one last smile before turning and walking away with his guards following behind him. As soon as the prince was out of sight, Mmesoma spun around to face Uremma, her eyes wide with shock. Uremma, how do you know the prince? How could you not tell me you have met him before? Uremma shook her head, still dazed. I didn't know he was the prince, Mmeso. I just thought he was a young man from the village. I met him on my farm when he was bitten by a snake and I helped him remove the poison. Mmesoma's mouth fell open. So you mean you saved Prince Obiora's life and you didn't even know who he was? Yes, Uremma said quietly. I didn't know. He didn't look like a prince that day. He was just dressed in normal clothes. Mmesoma let out a deep sigh, placing her hands on her hips. But Uremma, you should have told me something. I thought you didn't know him at all. I have been going on and on about the prince, and all this time, you had already met him. Uremma frowned slightly, feeling a bit confused. But you said you visited him and that he was starting to notice you. If you were with him that day, why didn't he talk to you or greet you? Mmesoma's face turned red and she looked away feeling embarrassed. I don't know. Maybe I was just imagining things, she admitted, lowering her voice. I like him so much, Uremma, and you know, I thought he noticed me, but maybe he didn't. Uremma sighed and reached out to touch her friend's arm gently. Mmesoma, I don't want to come between you and the prince. If you like him that much, I hope he notices you. Mmesoma looked up, her eyes pleading. Uremma, if we are really friends, you will help me. You're already talking to the prince and he knows you. Please, help me win his heart. Uremma was taken aback by her friend's request. What? How can I help you with that, Mmesoma? I can't do it. Please, Uremma, please, Mmesoma begged. If we are really friends, you will do this for me. Please. Uremma sighed, feeling conflicted. She didn't want to hurt her friend's feelings, but she also didn't want to get involved in something like this. Mmesoma, let's just go home and forget about this, okay? We'll talk later. Mmesoma nodded slowly, her shoulders dropping. All right, she murmured quietly. Let's go. With that, they both turned and walked back to Uremma's house in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Prince Obiora couldn't get Uremma out of his mind ever since their last encounter. He was curious about the girl who had saved him and wanted to know more about her. One morning, he decided to ask a few of his guards if they knew where she lived. Do any one of you know the girl named Uremma? Prince Obiora asked as he stood in the palace courtyard. One of the guards stepped forward and bowed. Yes, Your Highness. Uremma lives on the outskirts of the kingdom. I believe she stays in a small house near the river. Good. Take me there, Prince Obiora ordered. But, Your Highness, going there without a formal notice, the guard began hesitantly. I'm not asking for your permission, Prince Obiora interrupted gently but firmly. I want to visit her now. The guard bowed again. Yes, Your Highness, I will show you the way. With that, they set off towards Uremma's house. Meanwhile, at Uremma's place, Mmesoma was sitting on a low stool, carefully braiding Uremma's hair. They were both chatting and laughing when suddenly they saw someone approaching from a distance. Who is that? Mmesoma asked, squinting her eyes. She shaded her face from the sun and looked closely. Wait, Uremma, is that? Uremma stood up and took a step forward, her heart skipping a beat. That's Prince Obiora, she exclaimed, shock evident in her voice. What is the prince doing here? Mmesoma asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. Before they could say anything more, Prince Obiora arrived at their doorstep, a polite smile on his face. He nodded at both of them. Good afternoon, Uremma. Good afternoon, Mmesoma. Both girls quickly bowed, their voices stumbling over each other as they greeted him. Good afternoon, Your Highness. Please, you don't have to be so formal, Prince Obiora said, waving his hand lightly. He turned to Uremma. Can I come in? Uremma, still taken aback, nodded quickly. Yes, of course. Please come in. Mmesoma's mouth fell open as she watched the prince walk into the compound as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She couldn't believe that the prince was actually standing in Uremma's house. Your Highness, what brings you here? Uremma asked softly, still confused. Why would you come to my house? Prince Obiora raised an eyebrow. Is it a crime for me to visit a friend? He asked lightly. A friend? Uremma repeated, her confusion deepening. We are friends? Yes, Uremma, Prince Obiora said with a small smile. You saved my life. Of course, we are friends. Uremma blinked, not knowing what to say. I didn't know. Well, now you do, Prince Obiora replied cheerfully. But you still haven't offered me a seat. Oh, I'm so sorry, Uremma gasped, rushing to bring a stool for him. Please sit, Your Highness. Prince Obiora sat down comfortably. Uremma quickly went inside the house and returned with some palm wine and a small bowl of freshly roasted yam, setting it before him. Please, have something to eat, Your Highness, she said shyly. Thank you, Uremma, the prince said, taking a piece of the yam and sipping a little of the palm wine. While the prince was eating, Mmesoma, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly began acting differently. She stood up, adjusted her dress, and started moving around in an exaggerated manner. She laughed loudly, twirled her hair, and spoke in a high-pitched voice. Your Highness, how is the palace today? Mmesoma asked, fluttering her eyelashes. The palace is fine, Prince Obiora replied, his gaze shifting back to Uremma, who was watching Mmesoma with a puzzled look. Your Highness, did you know I'm very good at dancing? Mmesoma continued, lifting her dress a little as if she was about to dance. Prince Obiora raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. He turned back to Uremma and smiled. How is your farm, Uremma? I hope you are not overworking yourself. Uremma nodded, her voice gentle. I'm managing fine, Your Highness. The crops are growing well. Good, Prince Obiora said, smiling warmly. Seeing that the prince was paying no attention to her antics, Mmesoma grew frustrated. She folded her arms and huffed. But the prince didn't seem to notice. After a few more minutes of polite conversation, Prince Obiora stood up. I should be going now. It was nice seeing you again, Uremma, he said with a nod. Uremma quietly stood up. I'll see you off, Your Highness. As they walked together to the gate, Mmesoma stayed back behind, watching them with narrowed eyes. When Uremma returned, Mmesoma's face was red with anger. What's going on between you and the prince, Uremma? Mmesoma demanded, crossing her arms. Uremma sighed, knowing where this conversation was headed. Nothing, Mmesoma. I wasn't expecting him to visit today. He just came to say hello. Just say hello? Mmesoma asked. Why would the prince come all the way here just to say hello? I don't know, Uremma replied honestly. But nothing is going on between us, I promise. Mmesoma glared at her friend, her eyes filling with tears. Uremma, I love the prince, you know that. Don't try to steal him from me, please. Uremma's eyes widened in surprise. Steal him? Mmesoma, I'm not trying to steal him from you. I'm not even interested in the prince like that. We are just friends. Friends? Mmesoma scoffed, wiping her eyes angrily. If we are really friends, then help me get close to him. You are already talking to him, so help me make him notice me. Uremma sighed deeply, feeling a wave of sadness wash over her. All right, Mmesoma, I'll talk to him, but only because we are friends. Mmesoma's face softened and she nodded slowly. Thank you, Uremma, my friend. I'm sorry for being rude earlier. I just really like him. I know, Uremma said quietly, placing a hand on Mmesoma's shoulder. It's okay, I will help you. With that, Uremma picked up her basket and headed to her farm, her heart heavy with worry and confusion. She wasn't sure what she was getting herself into, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never let anyone come between her and her best friend, Mmesoma. Uremma arrived at her farm, ready to put her mind at ease by working on her crops. The sun was shining brightly, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, making the day feel peaceful. She picked up her hoe and began clearing the weeds around her cassava plant. The repetitive motions helped calm her thoughts, but soon she sensed someone's presence nearby. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat. Standing right in front of her was Prince Obiora, dressed in his royal attire. His bright robe shimmered in the sunlight, and his crown sat proudly on his head. The guards, who usually accompanied him, stood a few paces away, keeping a respectful distance. Your Highness, Uremma called out, bewildered. What are you doing here at my farm? Prince Obiora smiled warmly and took a step closer. I came to check my traps, he said casually. Uremma blinked, confused. Your traps? She repeated, glancing at his royal outfit. But you said before that it's impossible for you to come to the farm dressed like this. You told me that day you couldn't wear royal attire to check your traps, or have you forgotten? Prince Obiora laughed softly, scratching the back of his neck. Ah, you caught me there. I supposed I forgot, yeah, he said, knowing fully well that he was lying. But the truth is, I came here because I wanted to talk to you. Talk to me, Uremma echoed, frowning slightly. Why? Prince Obiora's expression grew serious. I want to know more about you, Uremma. You are different. You are not like anyone else I have met. Uremma looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. I don't think there is much to know, Your Highness. I'm just an ordinary girl trying to make a living. Prince Obiora shook his head gently. I don't think so. Let's find a place to sit and talk. I promise I won't take up too much of your time. Uremma glanced at the half-finished work on her farm and shook her head. I'm sorry, Your Highness, but I need to finish my work here. I can't afford to leave it undone. Without a word, Prince Obina turned to his guards and waved his hands. You all, help Uremma finish her work, he ordered. The guards immediately moved forward, picking up the hoes and other tools. They started working quickly and efficiently, clearing the weeds and tending to the crops. Uremma's mouth fell open in shock. Your Highness, you don't have to do this, she protested, looking at the guards who were already deep into the work. Prince Obiora smiled. I insist, Uremma. You have helped me, and now it's my turn to help you. He pointed to a small log nearby. Shall we sit? Uremma hesitated for a moment, but seeing how determined the prince was, she sighed and agreed. All right. They both sat down on the log, and for the first time, Uremma felt truly at ease talking to him. He asked her about her family, her life, and what brought her to Obodocha. Uremma took a deep breath and began to tell him her story. I'm originally from Isiago Kingdom, she started slowly. I came here because I lost everything back home. My parents died in a fire accident. Our house caught fire and I was the only one who survived. Prince Obiora's eyes softened. I'm so sorry, Uremma. That must have been very terrible. It was, Uremma admitted, her voice wavering a little. But what hurt even more was that no one believed me. The villagers accused me of being a witch, saying that I used dark powers to kill my parents. I was pushed away and treated like an outcast. They even called me Osu. I couldn't bear it anymore, so I left. Prince Obiora shook his head softly. People can be so cruel sometimes. Yes, but I have moved past that, Uremma said firmly. I don't want your pity, Your Highness. I'm not that weak girl anymore. I have made a life for myself here and I am content. Prince Obiora nodded, admiring her strength and resilience. You are amazing, Uremma. You have gone through so much, yet you are still standing strong. Thank you, Your Highness, Uremma said softly, giving him a small smile. I had to be strong. I had no choice. They continued talking for a long time, sharing stories and laughing. Uremma felt herself relaxing more and more as she spoke to the prince. He wasn't like she imagined a prince would be. He was kind, understanding, and easy to talk to. As they chatted, she noticed that the guards had already finished their work on the farm. The fields looked neat and clean, and all the crops were attended to. Wow! I can't believe it! Uremma exclaimed, looking around with wide eyes. They really finished everything. Prince Obiora chuckled. I told you, I wanted to help. You shouldn't have to do everything alone. Not now that we are already friends. Uremma smiled gratefully. Thank you, Your Highness. I really appreciate it. They stood up and began walking back towards Uremma's house, still chatting and laughing. When they arrived, Mmesoma was sitting on the same wooden stool outside waiting for Uremma. Mmesoma, Uremma called out cheerfully, but her friend didn't respond. Mmesoma stood up and gave a quick stiff bow to the prince. Good afternoon, Your Highness, she muttered. Prince Obiora nodded. Good afternoon, Mmesoma. It's nice to see you again. But instead of replying, Mmesoma turned on her heel and walked away without another word. Her face twisted with anger and jealousy. Uremma frowned, watching her friend disappear around the corner. I'm sorry, Your Highness. I don't know what's wrong with her. Prince Obiora shrugged slightly. It's okay. Maybe she's just having a bad day. Uremma sighed. I hope so. She's not usually like that. They talked for a little while longer, but Uremma's mind was on Mmesoma. When Prince Obiora finally said his goodbyes and left, Uremma stood at the gate, staring after him. She was grateful for his visit, but she couldn't help but worry about what Mmesoma might be thinking. I hope she understands, Uremma murmured to herself as she walked back inside the house. But a part of her feared that things were about to get even more complicated between her and her best friend. The next morning, as the sun began to rise and the birds chirped happily in the trees, Uremma sat outside her house, enjoying the cool breeze. She was still thinking about everything that had happened with Prince Obiora the day before when she heard hurried footsteps approaching. She turned and saw Mmesoma walking briskly towards her, a frown on her face. Mmesoma, Uremma called out, surprised. What's the matter? Mmesoma didn't bother to greet her. She stopped right in front of Uremma, her hands on her hips, and asked angrily, What were you doing with the prince yesterday? Uremma blinked, taken aback by her friend's harsh tone. What do you mean? We were just talking. Talking? Talking about what exactly? Mmesoma demanded, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. Are you trying to steal him from me, Uremma? You know I love him, so why are you always with him? Uremma took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She knew Mmesoma was upset, but she didn't want to make things worse. Mmesoma, please calm down, she said softly. I was only talking to the prince because You asked me to speak to him for you, remember? Mmesoma's eyes widened in surprise. Oh, I forgot, she stammered, her anger fading a little. I thought I thought you were trying to get close to him. No, Mmesoma, Uremma said gently. I was only trying to help you, just like you asked. I would never try to take him away from you. Mmesoma's face brightened with relief. I didn't know, Uremma. I'm sorry. I really thought you were trying to, steal him from me. Uremma shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. I would never do that. You're my friend, Mmesoma. Mmesoma smiled back, looking a bit embarrassed. I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions. So, what did the prince say when you talked to him? Uremma hesitated for a moment, then decided it would be best to keep this simple. He said he would think about it. Really? Mmesoma's eyes lit up with excitement. That means there is a chance. Oh, Uremma, thank you so much. You are the best friend anyone could ask for. Uremma forced a smile, nodding her head. I'm happy to help, Mmeso. Without warning, Mmesoma threw her arms around Uremma and hugged her tightly. Thank you, my friend. I'm really sorry for being rude earlier. I should have known you were only trying to help. It's okay, Mmeso, Uremma murmured, patting her friend's back gently. Don't worry about it. They pulled back from the hug, and Mmesoma looked at Uremma with a wide grin. I'm so glad we are friends. I know with your help, I will win the prince's heart. Thank you, Uremma. I owe you one. Uremma nodded, but deep down, her heart felt heavy. She knew that what she had told Mmesoma wasn't entirely true, but she didn't want to hurt her friend or ruin their relationship. Days went by, and Prince Obiora kept visiting Uremma, each time getting closer and closer. One day, after a long conversation filled with laughter and shared stories, Uremma looked at the prince seriously and asked, Your Highness, why do you keep coming here? What do you really want from me? Prince Obiora's smile faded, and he looked at her with a gentle but serious expression. I want you, Uremma. Uremma's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean I like you, Uremma. I want to get married to you. Prince Obiora said firmly, his gaze never leaving hers. Uremma's heart skipped a beat. Marry me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yes, marry you. Prince Obiora repeated softly, You are the one I want to be with, Uremma. Uremma felt her chest tighten. She looked away, shaking her head. I can't marry you, Your Highness. It's not possible. Why not? Prince Obiora asked, his voice filled with confusion. Because I'm a common outcast, Uremma said bitterly, her eyes clouding with sadness. I'm someone who was rejected by my own people. Why would you want to marry someone like me? Prince Obiora reached out and gently touched her hand. Don't call yourself that, Uremma. You are not an outcast. You are a strong, brave, and beautiful woman. I see you for who you truly are. Uremma's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. I don't want your pity, Your Highness. You shouldn't marry someone like me. It's not a pity, Prince Obiora said softly. I truly care for you, Uremma. You are the one I want by my side. Uremma shook her head again. No, I can't. It will ruin everything. Mmesoma likes you. If I marry you, it will destroy our friendship. She's the only friend I have, and I can't do that to her. Prince Obiora sighed deeply. Mmesoma, I don't like her that way, Uremma. You are the one I want. But if you need time to think about it, I understand. Uremma nodded slowly, her voice trembling. I will think about it. A few days later, Mmesoma came to visit Uremma. She was brimming with excitement and hope. Did the prince say anything about me? She asked eagerly. Uremma took a deep breath and looked down. Mmesoma, the prince didn't talk about you. He said he wants to marry me. What? Mmesoma's face twisted with anger and disbelief. Okay, what did you tell him? You said no, right? I I didn't know what to say, Uremma admitted quietly. I'm confused, Mmesoma. You are supposed to say no, Uremma, Mmesoma shouted, stepping closer. You promised you wouldn't take him away from me. Mmesoma, I'm not trying to. Don't! Mmesoma interrupted angrily, her face red with rage. If you take the prince from me, Uremma, you'll regret it. I'm warning you. Uremma's eyes widened in shock. Mmesoma, you are taking this too far. You know I care about our friendship. Then prove it. Mmesoma spat out, glaring at Uremma. Reject the prince and let him come to me. Without waiting for a response, Mmesoma turned and stomped out of the house, leaving Uremma standing there stunned and hot. What am I going to do? Uremma whispered to herself, tears filling her eyes. She didn't know what to choose, her friend's happiness or the prince's love. Either way, it seemed she was bound to lose something dear to her. Mmesoma was consumed with jealousy and anger, seeing that Uremma wasn't willing to step away from Prince Obiora. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She started going around the village, telling people awful things about Uremma. Do you know who Uremma really is? Mmesoma whispered to a group of village women one afternoon. They gathered closer, eager to hear what she had to say. She's not just a poor girl trying to make a living. She's an Osu, an outcast from Isiago Kingdom. The women gasped in shock. An Osu? No wonder she's always keeping to herself. One of them murmured. Yes, Mmesoma continued, her voice dripping with malice. That's why she's been hiding her past. Her own people chased her away because she's a witch. They say she killed her parents, and that's why they isolated her. Ha! One of the older women exclaimed, shaking her head. I knew there was something strange about her. No wonder she's always quiet and doesn't attend our gatherings. Mmesoma nodded, fueling the fire of gossip. Yes, and now she's trying to use her evil powers to charm our prince. We can't let her become our future queen. We must do something. The news spread like wildfire throughout the kingdom. By evening, almost everyone in Obodocha knew about Uremma's so-called dark past. People who used to greet her warmly now looked at her with fear and distrust. Some even crossed to the other side of the road whenever they saw her coming. Uremma was heartbroken. She couldn't believe that her best friend, Mmesoma, was the one spreading such horrible lies. As she walked through the village that day, she could feel the hostile stares and hear the cruel whispers behind her back. Look, it's her, the witch from Isiago, someone muttered. She's trying to bewitch our prince, another voice hissed. Uremma quickened her steps, her eyes stinging with orange tears. She didn't stop until she reached her farm, her only place of peace. And as if sensing her pain, Prince Obiora was already there waiting for her. Your Highness, Uremma called out softly, surprised to see him. She hurried over and bowed slightly. What are you doing here? Prince Obiora frowned as he looked at her tear-streaked face. Uremma, what's wrong? Why are you crying? It's Mmesoma, Uremma began, her voice trembling. She's telling everyone that I am an Osu. She told them I'm a witch who killed my parents, and that I'm trying to charm you with my evil powers. Prince Obiora's face darkened with anger. I already had Uremma. But don't worry. I won't let anyone hurt you. But your Highness, Uremma continued desperately. People are beginning to turn against me. I don't want to cause problems for you or your family. Listen to me, Prince Obiora said gently, reaching out to hold her hand. Nothing and no one can separate us. I will protect you, Uremma. Trust me. Uremma looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. You really mean it? Yes, Prince Obiora replied firmly. I will stand by you no matter what. Meanwhile, Mmesoma rushed back home, her heart pounding with anger and satisfaction. She found her father, Mazi Onyeka, sitting outside their house. Mazi Onyeka was one of the most respected red-cap chiefs in the kingdom, and Mmesoma knew he would listen to her. "Father, I need to talk to you," Mmesoma said, breathing heavily as she approached him. Mazi Onyeka looked up, frowning at his daughter's flushed face. "What's the matter, Mmesoma? Why do you look so troubled?" "It's about Uremma, father," Mmesoma said, her voice full of urgency. "She's an Osu from Isiago Kingdom, and she's trying to marry Prince Obiora." "What?" Mazi Onyeka exclaimed, his eyes widening in shock. "An Osu? How do you know this?" "She told me herself, Papa," Mmesoma lied, her voice lowering to a whisper. "She was chased away from her village because she killed her parents. We can't let her become the future queen of our kingdom. It's an abomination." Mazi Onyeka stood up, anger etched on his face. "This is serious. I must take this matter to the king and the other chiefs. We cannot let such an abomination happen in our land." Without another word, Mazi Onyeka stormed off to the palace. When he arrived, he found King Ujatu and the other chiefs gathered for their usual meeting. "Your Majesty," Mazi Onyeka said, bowing deeply, "there is a matter of great urgency that I must bring to your attention." King Ujatu raised an eyebrow. "What is it, Mazi Onyeka?" "It concerns your son, Prince Obiora," Mazi Onyeka began, his voice filled with anger. "He's planning to marry an Osu from Isiago Kingdom. It's an abomination. The prince cannot bring such a person into our land. We must put a stop to this." King Ujatu's face tightened with concern. "Are you certain about this?" "Yes, Your Majesty. The girl, Uremma, was rejected by her people. She is an outcast and a witch. If she becomes the queen, it will bring shame and disaster upon our kingdom." The other chiefs began murmuring among themselves, casting worried and angry glances at one another. King Ujatu raised his hand to silence them. "Summon Prince Obiora immediately." Moments later, Prince Obiora entered the meeting room, his face calm but determined. "Father, you called for me." "Yes, Obiora," King Ujatu said softly. "Who is this girl you have been meeting? The one the chiefs are speaking about?" Prince Obiora took a deep breath and began to explain everything: how he met Uremma, how she saved his life, and how he came to care deeply for her despite the rumors. "Father, I know what people are saying," Prince Obiora said firmly, "but Uremma is not an Osu. She's a kind, strong, and innocent girl who has been through so much pain and suffering. I love her and I want to be with her." King Ujatu's eyes softened. "I see. And what does your mother, the queen, think of this?" Prince Obiora smiled. "Mother and I have already spoken. She supports my decision." King Ujatu nodded slowly, a proud smile forming on his lips. "Very well, Obiora. You have my support too. We won't let anyone come between you and your happiness." The chiefs began to grumble in protest, but King Ujatu silenced them with a stern look. "Enough," he commanded. "My son's happiness is what matters. We will not let baseless rumors destroy the future of this kingdom." The room fell silent as the chiefs exchanged uneasy glances. Prince Obiora stepped forward, looking directly at the elders. "If any of you had a daughter," Prince Obiora began in a strong voice, "and she survived a terrible fire that took the lives of her parents, would you want her to be called a witch? Would you want her to be abandoned and branded an Osu and rejected by her own people?" The chiefs looked down, unable to meet the prince's gaze. "Uremma did not choose this fate," Prince Obiora continued. "She deserves a chance to be happy. I will not turn my back on her just because of some old traditions that have no place in our kingdom." With that, the room fell into a deep, thoughtful silence. The chiefs knew that the prince was right, but whether they would accept it or not was yet to be seen. Prince Obiora was sitting with anger as he stared across the room at Mazi Onyeka, who had been the loudest and most aggressive voice in the palace that day. He had realized that Mazi Onyeka's motivation for rejecting Uremma so fiercely wasn't just about protecting the kingdom's tradition. It was because he was Mmesoma's father. You, Prince Obiora said sharply, pointing directly at Mazi Onyeka. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the prince. Mazi Onyeka straightened up, his face tight with anger. Yes, your highness. You are Mmesoma's father, aren't you? Prince Obiora demanded, his voice filled with barely contained fury. Yes, I am, Mazi Onyeka replied proudly. And as her father, I will not let you bring disgrace upon this kingdom by marrying an Osu. My daughter Mmesoma is a good girl and enough. Prince Obiora cut him off, his voice echoing through the room. Listen to me carefully, Mazi Onyeka. I would never marry your daughter Mmesoma. Not now, not ever. Mazi Onyeka's face turned red with shock and humiliation. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The prince has spoken, King Ujato declared, his voice firm. My son will marry whoever he wishes to marry, and that's final. The other chiefs sat quietly, too stunned to say anything. Mazi Onyeka clenched his fist, his face twisted with anger, but he knew better than to argue further. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the palace, leaving the other chiefs to continue their meeting. Once Mazi Onyeka was gone, King Ujato turned to the other chiefs. We must summon Uremma to the palace, he announced. We need to meet her and know more about her background. The chiefs nodded in agreement and a messenger was sent to fetch Uremma. That night, Uremma was brought to the palace, where she stayed in one of the guest chambers. She was nervous but relieved that the king and queen were kind and welcoming. Prince Obiora spent time talking to her, assuring her that everything would be alright. Meanwhile, back at Mmesoma's house, Mazi Onyeka returned home, his face dark with fury. Mmesoma rushed to meet him, her heart pounding. Papa, what happened at the palace? She asked anxiously. Did you talk to the king? What did he say? Mazi Onyeka shook his head, his jaw clenched. The king has made up his mind. He supports Prince Obiora's decision to marry that Osu girl. They even summoned her to the palace tonight. Mmesoma's eyes widened in shock and despair. No, this can't be happening, she cried out, shaking her head wildly. Mazi Onyeka sighed deeply, placing a hand on her shoulder. There is nothing more we can do, Mmesoma. We have lost. But Mmesoma wasn't ready to give up. That night, she gathered 3 men from the village and whispered her wicked plan to them. They agreed to help her, believing they were doing the right thing for their kingdom. Under the cover of darkness, the 4 of them crept to Uremma's house, carrying torches and dried leaves. Mmesoma's heart was pounding, but she pushed her fear aside. If she couldn't have the prince, then neither would Uremma. Light it, Mmesoma whispered harshly to one of them. The man hesitated for a moment, but then he struck a match and set the dry leaves on fire. The flames quickly spread, consuming the small house in a matter of minutes. They watched as the fire roared and crackled. Mmesoma's heart racing with a strange mix of satisfaction and fear. Let's go, she hissed, and they all ran away, disappearing into the shadows. The next morning, Mmesoma was the first to spread the news. She ran around the village, screaming at the top of her lungs. Uremma is dead. Her house caught fire, and she burned just like her parents did. I knew it. She was a witch. The crowd quickly gathered around the smoldering remains of Uremma's house, whispering and murmuring in shock. I knew something bad would happen, someone muttered. She brought nothing but bad luck to our kingdom. But just as Mmesoma was crying fake tears and pretending to mourn, a royal carriage appeared in the distance. The crowd turned to see Prince Obiora's car slowly approaching, and as it drew nearer, the door opened. Uremma stepped out, looking confused and surprised to see so many people in front of her burnt-down house. Uremma, someone gasped. Is that really you? She's alive, another voice shouted. Mmesoma's eyes widened in horror. She took a step back, her heart pounding wildly. No, It can't be, she whispered. Uremma looked around, bewildered. What's going on here? You you are supposed to be dead, Mmesoma screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Uremma. I saw your house burn. You are a ghost. Uremma frowned, taking a step forward. Mmesoma, what are you talking about? Why would you think I was inside the house? Mmesoma stumbled back, fear etched on her face. I. Prince Obiara's eyes narrowed as he stepped out of the car, his gaze fixed on Mmesoma. How did you know Uremma was supposed to be inside the house, Mmesoma? Unless you were the one who set it on fire. Mmesoma's face turned pale. No, I didn't. But the prince's guards had already stepped forward. Arrest her, Prince Obiora commanded coldly. The guards grabbed Mmesoma, holding her firmly as she struggled and cried. No, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it, please. Uremma, forgive me. The villagers watched in stone silence as Mmesoma was taken to the palace. There, she confessed to everything, her jealousy, her lies, and how she had set Uremma's house on fire, thinking Uremma was inside. King Ojatu looked at Mmesoma with disappointment and sadness. You have committed a great crime, Mmesoma. You and your accomplices will be locked in the palace jail for 2 years, with only 1 meal a day. That's your punishment. As the guards led Mmesoma away, she turned to Uremma, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Uremma. Please forgive me. Uremma sighed deeply, feeling a mix of sadness and pity for her former friend. I forgive you, Mmesoma. I just hope you have learned your lesson. King Ojatu then turned to Uremma and Prince Obiora. We will travel to Isiago to perform the marriage rites and let everyone know that Uremma is not an outcast. She's now part of the royal family. A few days later, the royal entourage arrived at Isiago Kingdom. The villagers were stunned to see Uremma dressed beautifully and standing proudly beside Prince Obiora. King Ojatu addressed the crowd, his voice firm. My son, Prince Obiora, has come to marry Uremma. She's not an Osu. She's innocent, and from today, I declare that no one shall call her an outcast ever again. There were murmurs of shock, regret, and shame from the villagers as they realized the mistake they had made. They watched silently as the marriage rites were performed, officially making Uremma the wife of Prince Obiora. After the ceremony, they returned to Obodocha, where a grand traditional wedding was held. Uremma, now Princess Uremma, stood beside her husband, radiating happiness. After the celebrations, she approached the king. Your Majesty, she said softly, bowing her head. I have a request. Speak, my daughter, King Ojatu said kindly. Please, I ask that Mmesoma be released from the palace jail. Uremma pleaded. She has learned her lesson. I want to forgive her completely. The king smiled. Very well, because you have asked, I will release her. Mmesoma was brought out of the jail and she ran to Uremma, tears in her eyes. Thank you, Uremma. I'm so sorry for everything. Can we be friends again? Uremma looked at her friend for a long moment before nodding slowly. Yes, Mmesoma, we can. As long as you promise never to do anything like this again. I promise, Mmesoma cried, hugging Uremma tightly. I promise, my queen, I promise. Prince Obiora stood nearby, smiling as he watched them. That night, he and Princess Uremma sat in the palace garden, reminiscing about everything they had been through. Who would have thought we would end up here? Uremma said softly, leaning against her husband's shoulder. I knew, Prince Obiora whispered, kissing her forehead gently, because our love was always meant to be. And so, Prince Obiora and Princess Uremma lived happily ever after, their love overcoming every obstacle that came their way. This story teaches us that true love can overcome any obstacle. Uremma was judged unfairly because of things she didn't do, and people called her a bad name. but she stayed strong and proved herself. Even when her friend Mmesoma tried to hurt her because of jealousy, Uremma chose forgiveness over revenge. Prince Obiora showed that love doesn't look at labels like outcast, but at the heart. The king supported his son and chose what was right, even when the people were against it. This story tells us to stand by the truth, believe in ourselves, and always choose kindness and forgiveness, no matter how much others may try to hurt us. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Uremma on African Stories. If you liked it and felt inspired with her journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.